What's going on, everybody? This is the Blockchain Backer, bringing you the latest cryptocurrency news and analysis. Today, we're going to be talking about the Bitcoin price charts along with the altcoin market and the United States stock market as we get ready to wrap up this week and get ready to head into next week, which is the big week, election week here in the United States. We'll theorize a couple of things going on here on the charts and, of course, talk about what has historically happened as we get to this point, as it is now November of 2024. Four-year cycle theory, all that good stuff. We're in the thick of it. We'll tie that into U.S. elections and what's going on right now and see how things are looking. First things first, Bitcoin came back and backtested the breakout that happened earlier this week, while the altcoin market continued to waddle along as anticipated, as it's in kind of a longer accumulation schematic going on over here. At the same time, the U.S. stock market still hasn't gone into any expansion yet. I'm not too shocked to see Bitcoin hasn't yet, and the crypto market hasn't yet either, considering that has been the consistent event in all of Bitcoin's four-year cycles. Now, every 4 years around this time is when the crypto market has tended to take off. Many attribute it to the block reward halving. However, I've presented it many times. There's an inconsistency with that ideology that we take off around this time every 4 years when the block reward halving is not exactly 4 years apart. 3 years and 7 months, 3 years and 10 months, 3 years and 11 months. But here we are in October and November and things kick off. October and November and things kick off. October and November and things kick off. But what is consistent, of course, it's the expansions taking place in the United States stock market at the exact same time. When expansion happens from prior to the great financial crisis, when expansion happens over here in November of 2016 after the election, and then when expansion happens over here after the election. So the thing that has remained consistent in here is every 4 years, we have a presidential election here in the United States. It's around this time of the year. And it's like getting through that event has kind of been the timing of when expansions take place in broader markets. And hate it or love it or have your ideology flipped all the way upside down, that's when Bitcoin has tended to as well, and same with the crypto market. And so, of course, with us back here at the all-time high, we are a mere 4 days away from election day. If things are to remain consistent to how they've been historically, we just get through that and things get moving on. But until then, we just kind of have to sit back here and wait and see if that's going to end up playing itself out. My thoughts are we still have this dynamic going on over here in the altcoin market, and that it's going to still just kind of continue to waddle around in here for some time. I presented an idea there in Markets in the Morning on Wednesday of what we have seen before when something like this occurred for XRP back in 2020. So for those who were here during the 22.5 cent days, that when this occurred, and in particular, this moment right here, right? We're talking all about that going on right in there. This moment was particularly painful for people. And that's why you'll hear people say, oh man, I remember the 22.5 cent days. It was terrible. It wasn't necessarily the pullback that was so terrible. Percentage wise, it was only 33% of a pull down happening in here. It was the sideways action that went on for a while. And then it was one other thing in particular that happened right here that made it incredibly painful. And that was what Bitcoin was doing at this time, that it had corrected with Bitcoin all along here, done all of this price action, but then Bitcoin went on to break out of this range. And when Bitcoin broke out of this range, Bitcoin crept up while this crept down. And you could see that here, that they were doing them at the same time. I don't know if that's going to happen here, but I've definitely seen it before. Ultimately, it led to a massive blast out of there. But there was this brief time period right in here where it was pretty excruciating. And so you've heard me talk here in the last couple of weeks of like, I'd be a little concerned about sentiment in something like this in this environment. And now, especially if Bitcoin's able to poke out of here. And it's having to have kind of that bigger picture view of what's happening here in the market rather than focusing so short-sighted. If Bitcoin is able to get out of here, it's epic for the whole market. And my view will remain that way, even if something like this is at play over here in the market, where it's still just kind of having to drift in here while everybody's hooting and hollering about a 10% move on Bitcoin at the same time. Ultimately, this is the bigger picture that I'm running within here and that I'll be looking for. Now, yesterday, I posted a new newsletter over there on blockchainbacker.substack.com, the big rally, a rotational top, why 2024 to 2025 mimics a rotational surge and how crypto could benefit. And it essentially plays into this whole idea in here, but it is having to tie together that big picture over here on Bitcoin and what is happening in in broader markets. I get it. Everybody hates to hear it. And you're tired of hearing it. And I'm tired of saying it. That there has to be an expansion happening in broader markets because it's happened every single time. However, when you have this type of market dynamic here with the Russell 2000 not playing along with the Dow Jones, the S&P, and the NASDAQ, you have to somehow have a thesis of what is actually going on in the market. And that's what I talk about all in the newsletter. And we've touched on it here on the channel in Markets in the Morning and in videos. But there are very few times where you actually end up having something like this happen where it's not all expanding at once. So like we talk about how Bitcoin's gone into expansion in November and December every 4 years after the election, right? Well, the thing that was consistent about those things is that all of the indexes were expanding at that same time in 2012, 2016, and 2020. It's like they waited for the election to pass by and then the indexes expanded. This is the first time we're going to go into the election where you have the S&P, Dow, and NASDAQ all at these all-time highs, but this one still has not expanded. And so we go throughout history and we say, all right, well, how many times has this happened and what has typically been the end result when we end up having extreme consolidation and narrow breadth throughout the United States stock market? Does it ultimately lead to an expansion? And no, it doesn't. Whenever this dynamic happens, where the other indexes lead the way ahead and they don't take the Russell with it, there's really just a handful of times where things like this have happened. The one we obviously all know about is C19, which ultimately led to an extreme crash. That's still always on the table, and that's exactly how it played out during the Nifty 50 bubble of the late 1960s and early 1970s, during Black Monday's crash of 1987, the great financial crisis, 2015, 2016, and then, C19. We've seen this dynamic happen before, and it ultimately does not mean expansion is going to happen. However, there's an alternative for it as well, and that is what happens when equity bubbles are being printed. And those who can really relate to this are those who were around in crypto back in 2017 when Bitcoin was running from about $5,000 to $17,000. The altcoin market would not participate in that. XRP was down 50% that whole time with the run from Bitcoin from like $2,000 to $17,000. But then the second that the profit taking started there on Bitcoin right here, that is the moment that the altcoin started to explode, which you could see right here. But notice even on here, the price of XRP is still down from its height from back in May over here, all the way in here as Bitcoin goes roaring on this bubble, and it's the only show-stopping event. You can add Ethereum to that as well. The story is the same, right? See, here's that peak setback over here in June. It goes all the way over. It just barely gets above it. Nothing spectacular. Boom, the profit taking starts there in that bubble, and boom, off and away the market goes. So this is called a rotational top. And like mentioned earlier, the only times we've ever seen these things play out is during moments before things are about to get really bad, like C19, the Nifty 50 bubble, Great Financial Crisis, Black Monday 1987, or when bubbles are being printed in equities. And so we have a lot of confluence to that right now that we did to 1998 to 2000, where this is the only other time with the Russell 2000 that this has ever happened. And it turned out positively, is that initial profit taking started over here for big tech. And in that moment, it broadened out. The rally broadened out. However, it would be short-lived and, eventually that. But this moment in time would be the epic time for markets and likely where something like this would happen. But there are really no circumstances for looking for things to play out the way that they did back in 2012, 2016, and 2020, where we go into a 4-year cycle and things rip up, because this isn't the same setup as all of them. Still means we could get through the election. That could be where things take off and go. But I think everybody kind of looking for the exact same thing over and over again. We just know it's not the same. This is all mimicking much more of the dot-com bubble, except it's like the AI bubble right now. And what happens when those equity bubbles in extreme narrow breadth happen, and that we're all just kind of waiting for a profit take to happen in that market and for a rotation to start playing itself out. Like we saw back at the top of the 2000 dot-com bubble, where it was very similar to this, where all the indexes got out. Eventually, there was profit taking that happened over there in big tech. And at that moment, that was where the rally broadened out. So I still think that could be in play. And while the timing of when all of these things have happened really have been right around here, right around November, even when all of this played out back in 1999, when was it? It was in November. When have all the expansions for Bitcoin when have all the rips really actually begun for Bitcoin on the 4-year time frame? It's actually been November. Uptober just kind of sounds better than Upvember, because what we did have in October in 2016, the one in 2012 actually was down, but we did get lucky here and we did actually end up getting an Uptober here for Bitcoin in 2024. But when you go throughout history of the actual expansions taking place, they all really happen November and December. So will the 4-year cycles hold true? We'll see. I think it's a lot dependent on equity markets and the broadening out happening rather than it being something like a C19 crash, which we still don't know. But if you look at the similarities of what is happening now compared to prior to C19, or if you look at it compared to what was happening during the dot-com bubble, I do believe you find more similarities to this is actually acting much more like what a rotational top is like, which would ultimately mean that this will play out a little bit different than what most people expect, right? That we're all kind of used to these 4-year cycles that are year-long expansions, that once you get through the all-time high, you have X amount of time for things to kind of keep going. But for the example of like in 1998 to 2000, that once the Russell did get out, it was actually only 3 months. It was 83 days. And then it was over, like a snap of the fingers. So currently, that's where my head is at right now. When I look at all of this, I think we still need to see that broadening out happen in the Russell. We're at the right time of the year for it to happen, and we're at the right time of the year of when it even happened back in 1999. But why talk about it too much? Let's just get through the election, right? It's on Tuesday. We'll see how the markets react as we get through that moment. Otherwise, I'm keeping my eyes peeled for several different things. While I wouldn't wish the sentiment to be like this in any means, and I'm not cheering for it, I'm just saying I would like have a clear picture of what is actually happening if it did happen. That if Bitcoin did get out and then just kind of creeped here, and then if the altcoin market did that, I know sentiment would be ravished, but it'd be pretty easy to come onto the channel every day and be like, you realize what's happening. You realize what's happening. Alert, alert. Because we've seen that before as well. So I think things are looking good. I don't see anything to scream about or holler about. Bitcoin's trying to fight back up this Friday morning as we get ready to head into the weekend. And of course, next week's election week. So enjoy yourself a weekend. We'll see if we have any election surprises. I was expecting some in October. I don't really think we really had anything too surprising. It's typical in America. We have something called an October surprise, something that drastically changes or alters the perception of one candidate. There really wasn't anything too surprising about October, but of course, we're just a couple of days until election day, so there's always the chance of that happening. Otherwise, I hope that you had a nice Halloween. I have kids, so yesterday was a big event of school and parades and trick-or-treating and all that stuff. But till next week, I hope that you guys have an absolutely wonderful weekend. If you'd like to read more about the thesis on a rotational top, of course, you could check out the newsletter at blockchainbacker.substack.com. Comes with a 21-minute audio voiceover that I recorded in here. Give you something to listen to throughout the weekend. And otherwise, I hope that you have a good one. So thank you guys so much for watching. If you could, please like this video and give it a thumbs up. If you are new to the channel, please subscribe and hit the notification bell so you could be notified of when I create new content and when I go live. As always, this is not investment advice and I am not a financial advisor. But if you ever need a pick-me-up or a little bit of reassurance, just remember that the blockchain backers got your back. Have a good one.